solution. There's a lot more going on there than you think. So when we first started this and someone said this is just salt water, I was like, sorry, it's not just salt water. Maybe I could start with something I'm really excited about. And that is that for 13, 14 years we've known we were doing lots of cool things, but we just recently got some science back that I'm guessing you might have heard a little bit about at the plant. But I'm just fascinated by it because, you know, I have the benefit, I can walk to my office 15 steps away from here and pull out binders of letters that have been organized into the systems in the body. My dad started doing this 13 years ago. Whenever he would get a letter, he would just put it in a binder and it would be under some function in our body. And there were several times when I'd come to the house and he would say, well, look at this one, you know, look at this one. And we knew, had very high confidence that this was in fact redox signaling. And redox biochemistry as a field 15 years ago was not getting a lot of attention. I remember reading sites that were making fun of my dad, that he was making up terms like redox signaling molecules. So for me, it's super vindicating for him to see, you know, a Harvard Center of Excellence for Redox Biology and Medicine, and you know, if at a practical level, if you think about it, over the last 30 or 40 years, antioxidants have been one of the major movements in wellness. And in particular, those were born of a theory called the free radical theory of aging. The idea was that free radicals, which were you know, those that had an electron, were banging around and doing damage to a cell, causing oxidative stress, and then the idea was to neutralize that with antioxidants. And there's absolute truth in that. But as is typical, the pendulum swung too far, and they started assuming that exogenous or supplemental antioxidants could do everything that they actually can't. And so there was a classic move. But because marketing always grabs onto science and then tries to manipulate it such that to sell things, that's why you saw Cherry 7-Up with an antioxidants label on it. And they were sued for that because they were overstating their cherry syrup was in fact providing antioxidant benefit. I find it interesting though that you know, while the supplementation, exogenous being exo meaning outside of us versus endogenously created antioxidants in our body, probably the most recent one we're talking a lot about here is glutathione. If you were to chat GPT or Google glutathione, you see that it's a powerfully, super powerful endogenous or internally created antioxidant. It's not something you necessarily have to take a berry to get to, but it does have to be triggered. And if you were, I'll drop for you really quickly, if you were, this is kind of what I'm learning about what I've known. It's like you know, but you learn more about it as you go. But this is kind of the way I'm thinking about it these days. If this is a cell, and this is the nucleus of the cell, and first off, you know, a molecule like ours, and maybe Hunter, I don't know if Hunter did your tour today, or who did the tour.
It was the team.
The team did it? Yeah, and so the first thing that they may have mentioned to you is these molecules are high energy, but they're really small. And that because they're high energy and small, they can actually cross the membrane of a cell. So that's the first thing. But NRF2 is something we're learning a lot about. NRF2 is essentially a protein of sorts that is really important for triggering the development of anti-inflammatory, antioxidant agents in the body. And in the cytoplasm of the cell, NRF2 is connected to another protein that plays a really important role. It's called KEAP1. Now, I don't expect you to, maybe you care about this, I think it's interesting. So KEAP1 holds NRF2 almost like an anchor. And out here, outside of the nucleus, this is all cytoplasm. And it holds this in the cytoplasm in such a way that NRF2 is not being wasted or degraded. So KEAP1 is both protecting NRF2 as well as holding it in the cytoplasm of the cell such that it doesn't move or translocate into the nucleus and start doing work in the nucleus. And what we're learning is because our molecular structure can get through the cellular membrane because it's so small, it's really turning on the cell. So in simplistic terms, you don't have to be a scientist, you just say it's turning on cells. That's all you should say. I don't know if any of you can tell me how your cell phone works, right? You don't have to be able to tell someone how it works to use a cell phone. It works. If your hands are feeling better, right, Kay, if you're actually saying, hey, wait a minute, I can take a top off a bottle or something that your husband was seeing was hurting you before, you've got something that works. And what I like to tell people is you don't have to become a chemist, you don't have to be a scientist, you don't have to be a doctor, you really don't. You just need to say, hey, it's helping to turn on your cells. And there's some truth in that. What I just want to share with you is what I'm excited about, so I'm cheating into the chemistry a little bit, and I'm not a scientist. But what I'm learning is think of keep one like an anchor that's holding NRF2 from translocating into the nucleus. When NRF2 is up in here, it begins transcribing NRF2. When it moves from here to here, it only moves here if this relationship is broken. Meaning keep one holds it, anchors it, from allowing it to translocate into the nucleus and then transcribe genes that then they interact with the antioxidant response elements, AREs, in the nucleus. That's creating glutathione. So what's happening is, one of the things we're learning is we know, because we did some tests recently and we saw the intersection of NRF2 in the nucleus increase, which means when our product was applied to it, more NRF2 was not left in the cytoplasm attached to keep one, but is actually translocating to the nucleus, which is then triggering anti-inflammatory response. Simple terms, very high energy molecules, you can supplement them, you drink them, they're absorbed into the cell. They're small enough they can move into the cell. When they're in the cell, they turn on the cell to do all sorts of anti-inflammatory and antioxidant response elements. I'm just telling you that this is what we're learning is the mechanism of that. It's breaking that anchor off, leaving it in the cytoplasm. That allows this agent to move in here and begin transcription of genes. What does this mean? A whole bunch of really cool things. Because when antioxidant response elements in the cell are upregulated and starting to work, they not only affect the cell of that individual cell, but it cascades and it starts to influence other cells. So that's the cascading effect that we're seeing, is that it's having an effect not in a singular place, right, but it's actually causing a cascade of turning cells on. That's why people are having responses across a broad range, because guess what? Everything about you is cellular, everything. So one of the concerns early on when my dad was starting to believe in this, and I was way slow to believe in it. So I'm Zora, I'm like, yeah, whatever, like I don't buy it. But he was concerned that if you went down a traditional route, you have to make an indication, kind of like a key on a piano. You have to say, this product is for this indication. They call it an INDA, is an indication of a new drug. And the indication says this is for one use case application. But listening to your stories around the table, right, because it's affecting at a cellular level, because everything in my body is cellular, eyes, nose, organs, mouth, throat, everything, you start to realize, well, what if we got so narrow in the indication that we were leaving a lot of people out from the benefit of what it could represent? And that was a big impetus for why my dad was like, you know what, I think we should try to commercialize this differently. Because if we went the traditional drug route, it would just be narrowed down to a single indication and really never be applied to the benefit of someone else's challenges, whether it was an ear or an eye or a throat or any number of other things. So I'm excited because we all know that have been around here for many years what it can do. And it's so neat now to have scientists working with us. And you can spend a lot of money on science and not get meaningful outcomes. And we have over the years. But years ago, we re-upped our dedication to saying we wanted to further the science of what at least this is doing. And I'm kind of excited because the last few months we've really kind of cracked one of the codes. I should tell you that we chose one genetic pathway of 15 that we know are upregulated by that. So we just picked one and we were 1 for 1. And I have a high degree of confidence that as we continue research, we're going to continue to find things. So think of it as like energy, not stimulants, not like caffeine. You know, you think of an energy drink, that's really just a stimulant. But everything in the body, and redox biology in medicine is the understanding of where does energy play, right? And you know, you transfer electrons into this phone. I did last night, so I have like what 86% left in here of a battery. I transferred electrons from a plug in the wall into this battery to store that energy, and now I'm using that energy when I turn my flashlight on or when I'm on my phone. Your whole body is an energy mechanism, and it's electrical. There's millivoltage moving throughout your body. EKG is measuring electrical pulse, right? So Dad was ahead of himself, and I made fun of him and had a lot of fun with it because I thought this was crazy, and I thought he was nuts to do this. He was 69, very successful already. Head of strategy at Kraft Foods for many years globally in Chicago, and then retired to Park City here to the mountains. Drove my mom crazy at home when he retired. She's like, get out of here, go do something else, and tell me how to like run my house because you've been gone for 40 years, now you're telling me how to do this. And he ran a biotech company for 4 or 5 years, and that was kind of what helped him to see the underlying truths and fundamentals of this technology. His closest friends on the board of Pfizer was the CEO of Kraft, Gillette, Nabisco, Oscar Mayer, a very famous CPG guy named Jim Kiltz. The Kiltz Marketing Institute at the University of Chicago is named after that friend of my dad's. And when he first bought the patents, my dad was like, well, maybe I'll talk to Jim and we'll find a way to just flip this back into that space. But you know, he became more and more convinced that if we could commercialize it as a supplement, that we should. So he pulled back from chasing down the pharma route and began to research how could we do this legitimately as a supplement. And we hired some ex-FDA internal attorneys who ran outside firms, and they gave us a bunch of really good counsel and says, if you do it this way, you can sell it as a supplement. So that's how we started. I didn't want to do it. I didn't believe in it. I thought it was crazy. I had a neighbor with a very, very serious problem and got him some of it. And it had a huge effect on him. And to the point where I couldn't ignore at least that one experience that I had seen. And so I was a CDO, it was a chief distribution officer for a multi-billion-dollar, 100-plus-year-old financial institution. So I was over all the distribution channels of financial instruments. And I'd spent 18 years getting to that place in my career. I wasn't really looking for a change. But I started getting my own belief around it. I started traveling and speaking to people, and really very good, what I would call normal, ordinary people that I knew were not like, they had no reason to tell me anything other than what they're experiencing, and were telling me really beautiful stories. You know, like the one you were sharing of Pamela of the foot, or a callus, or like just very beautiful human real stories that didn't feel like marketing topspin to me. It was just real. And then I would come home and I would say to my dad, like, this is what I learned here, and this is what I learned here. And we chose this form of distribution, that is to say through people, through networks, because we never really thought anyone would just buy this off a shelf. It's like, who's gonna just buy it? So you needed a story, you needed some degree of conviction someone else had about it to share it. And we launched into this completely blind. We didn't know what network marketing was about. We had a negative impression of it in general, that it was typically a head fake, you know, like people telling you one thing, but it's not really there. And it's been a really beautiful experience for us to be able to get around the world and quickly move into places where it was needed. There's a lot more places I'd like to get to, but it's been a really joyful experience to be able to share. And just to hear the few stories that we heard around the table today, you know, just imagine if you were in my seat and you had heard this now into the thousands of times, and you've heard it in different countries, you've heard it in different cultures, so it becomes really affirming. And you know, for me, nothing's on trial anymore. Like, I appreciate how honest you're being, but if you're here, this is worthy of your time. No one is too good for this. My dad was 69 when he started it. So if it's an age thing you're looking at, most of the people doing this with us are a little bit older, but it's a really cool culture as a result because they're real people, they've lived through, they've got scar tissue, they've had ups and downs, you know? And I love our culture. Like people, outside consultants come to me and say, you know, you gotta go down market to younger people. I'm like, actually, I don't really know that I want to. Like, if we have young people getting involved, it's typically around athletics or some of the other products that we have. But, you know, because you make less of these molecular structures as you age, it kind of points to the reality. And then just a real quick thing, I'm going quick because I've got a hard stop here in a minute, but I have you know, some of you may remember a name of Mark Eaton. He passed away a little while ago. He was a 12-year NBA player, a good friend of mine. We would fly fish together. And I started giving Mark Asea years ago. And he would call me every month to get more of it. And of course, because he was a professional athlete, I would just get it for him. He was a good friend. And one time I asked him, I said, so why, you know, tell me why you keep wanting my product. I mean, I'm selling it, but he said, well, professional athletes know their bodies. I know my body better than most people know their body because we pushed on it so hard. So he goes, my sensitivity to what my body feels after all these years of kind of abusing it, working it really hard, I know in a matter of seconds if something is adding to it. You get to learn your body. That made a lot of sense to me because when I compared that with older people or people that are ill of any age or dealing with a challenge, it made sense, right? Because your sensitivity to how you feel when you're dealing with discomfort gets elevated. In his case, his sensitivity to how he felt was elevated because he was an athlete. And it makes sense to me. So we have a really interesting kind of blend. We have really, really engaged athletes that know their bodies, that get so clear on when they're feeling, whether it's a recovery moment or something else, they can feel that. And that's where we get into younger ages. And then we have a lot of folks similar to my age and older, I'm 53, that just start feeling a little different, right? We were talking about that. It's like, yes, like I normally feel really great, and I'm starting to feel stuff a little differently. And that's why I think we have a little bit higher average age. When we started, the goal was to not just sell a product, but to try to create a culture. I refer to that culture as our ethos. Ethos is a beautiful term. It means the spirit of a culture. So if you said, you know, I go around the world and speak all over to very large groups, and I ask a question: if a corporation, corporeal comes from body, right? So corporations are a body. So if you said corpse or corporeal or even the Marine Corps, that's a body. And then I say, if a corporation is a body, can it have a soul? And almost every person I talk to around the world answers that question in the affirmative. They say, yeah, it can have a soul. I always follow up with the next question is, do most corporations have a soul? And almost as quickly and unanimously, they respond no. So that's intriguing to me, right? So if a corporation, the etymological derivative of the idea of a corporation is a body, right? We use organization, organs, like we use all these terms that point to bodies and systems. And then you say, okay, but the definition of a soul is the spiritual part of a person believed to give life to the body. So that's Webster. That's not some specific theological approach. It's just Webster says, what is a soul? The spiritual part of a person believed to give life to the body. So I like to think, can our corporation have a corporate soul? And early on, I went to my dad and said, if I'm going to do this, like this industry has a tendency to give away the soul for the money and to try to get people excited and have a blood pressure change so they sign up. And I don't really like that. I'm not really interested in building a company around that. So early on we said, how would we differentiate around a corporate soul, which for me is tantamount or synonymous with an ethos or a spirit. And it's taken on a life of its own over time, and I've taught it all around the world. I've been told, you can't teach this in Europe because they just want to know about the money, and that's a lie. And then they say, you can't teach this in Romania, or you can't teach this in Mexico, you can't. And the fact is, we've taught it all over the world, and it's because it's truth. And one of my great friends one time said to me, if it's true, you can teach it. So we teach a lot about how we can change the way we interact with other people. and how to take a soul with a product like this into a marketplace and not get wrapped around the axle of the money or the economic potential such that you kill the soul of the company. The soul of this company started from a guy that didn't need money, who wanted to do something good. And that's a fact. My father drove the same car, ate the lousy food that he always ate. He was not like a super wellness guru guy. He was not looking for a 20-year younger wife. He's still married, you know, like all the things about running up money and like reliving some new life. No, if you met my dad back then, you'd be like, smart guy, good guy, but he didn't need to do this. But he genuinely thought, we can help a lot of people. This is cool. He was ignorant enough and arrogant enough and intelligent enough to think like, well, of course we could do this. Like, my dad was the guy that he might be wrong, but he was never in doubt. Do you know what that is like? Especially when you're a teenager growing up in a home where your dad is like, he may be wrong, but he's never in doubt. That's not a fun dad to grow with sometimes. Because he would be like, no, we're not doing that. I'm like, but you're wrong, you know? And he's like, no, but I have no doubt, right? You know, so, okay. So I've had a fun life arm wrestling with my dad. He's clearly one of my dear mentors, but we've always kind of poked fun at each other over the years. He's now 84. I would love to tell you he's vibrant and well. He's not. He's declined mostly from Alzheimer's, and it's been rough for me to watch because he was just a force in my life, not just academically or mentally, but he was just a strong person in my life. So we're now in 33 countries. I think you should know this. Like, if you know anything about business, you would want to know this. We don't have any institutional investors, so what does that really mean? It kind of means that nobody's got a nose ring on me or the business telling us what we have to do. We're in control of the business. We don't have any debt. And by debt, I don't mean lines of credit that we can quickly, like I could pay off my lines of credit tomorrow. I do use some revolving debt to just be intelligent with the business. But in terms of institutional debt that could saddle the business, that I wouldn't be able to serve that debt if I got it, none. So what you see here has been really built on a very small amount of invested capital from a friends and family base by and large, and we control it. None of us are to take ourselves too seriously. We take the business really seriously, but none of us take ourselves too seriously. And this industry is notorious for maybe inflating the egos of people that start these. I think if you hung out with me for a month, you're kind of boring. Like, you're a nice person, but you're kind of boring. Or you'd see a pile of laundry in my house, and I'd be like, yeah, step over that. You know, there's a pile of laundry in the house. So we're not trying to put some optical spin on this. It's just a really unique technology. We bumped into it. We found a way to commercialize it legitimately as a supplement as opposed to the other mechanisms, and it works, and it makes a big difference.
Next level marketing.
Yeah, sure. So I get a little nervous that the industry has given away the moral ground of what it could be, and I teach a lesson to try to make a point. It's an attempt at what I call moral creativity. For me, moral creativity is trying to teach your kids a truth that's old and never changes, but do it in a new way so that you actually keep their attention. Because what I find is kids in particular and youth in particular are pretty quick to just like categorize something as moral as like boring. So I try to come up with ways that are unique and creative to teach that to them. And in a similar fashion here in the company, I'll give you some examples. I said, what if the old world was really worried about being convincing? Like, that was their focus. Like, how do I convince Kay that she needs to do this? And I said, what if you gave away convincing for just convicted? What would happen? What if you just knew and believed and didn't really care what somebody else interpreted that belief as? So one of the differences, and I call this versus multi-level marketing, I call this next level marketing. Kind of a play on the level marketing piece, but saying, instead of being multi-level, what if we went next level? What would that look like? Well, one of those dimensions is we would move from worrying about convincing someone to just being convicted. And you can feel that, that's different, right? Another one, okay, what if I said we want to move from being transaction oriented, we want to move from just focusing on transactions to transformations. That's kind of cool, like that's different. Transactions are trade your money for a bottle. And that's the gravitational pull of all business. What happens when someone who has the potential of a serious issue with an ear, or or even a business opportunity, like when Jerry says with great emotion, I'm living a world that I should never have imagined, I could never have imagined. Those are transformational moments. Your wife going from a walk around the block is not a transaction, it's a transformation that she's been on. And to me, that's exciting. The idea of someone being at any age or stage of their life and saying, no, I'm gonna reinvent this. I wanna transform the next stage of my life. So that's another dimension of going from old world transactional mindset to new world and next level transformation. And then I hit several of these. I say the old world was worried about income. We should be more interested in become. In fact, I say the outcome is not income. Like, I'm trying to teach my kids this because the social media world they look at every day is trying to teach them that the outcome is income. And I say the outcome is overcome, become, and income. You need all of them. And the idea that the greatest reward I receive from my labor is what I earn from it is actually not true. The greatest reward I receive from my labor is what I become by it. And I really believe that. So there's things like moving off income to become, moving off of compensation to compassion. Like, what does that look like? When someone says to me that, by the way, Susie, that happens to me every time I have a meeting, so you're fine. Don't sweat it. But like compensation plans, the industry runs around drawing circles and dollar signs, and if you do this right, you do this. And I'm just like, but what if it's just compassion? Like, what if it's Lance, right? Like, what does that feel like when I'm motivated by the sense that I might be able to help your son? Might. I'm not running around saying I can, I'm confident that this can help people. There's a really different experience someone has when they can sense you're coming and approaching them from a place of genuine compassion. Of course, compassion meaning, the compound word of come and together and with. Passion, actually, the derivative of passion is suffering. That's why the last week of Christ's life is referred to as the Passion of Christ. So the idea of suffering with someone is really beautiful to me in terms of a next level approach to marketing this. It's going out and saying, hey, I'm mindful that people are suffering and I'd like that to motivate me, as opposed to like the compensation plan. So these are plays on words, right? So moving from convincing to convicted, moving from transactions to transformations, moving from income to become, moving from compensation to compassion, right? And there's others, right? There's moving from hype to hope. I think the old industry tried to hype you into getting all jacked and excited about it. I'd rather just traffic in hope, right? So what's the difference? They're really uniquely different. One's really a beautiful feeling of like, what if I could just provide someone a little bit more comfort in their day-to-day? Or I could extend like cousins going on some fun trips together. That's kind of really hopeful, right? But if I'm trying to hype people into it, it feels really cosmetic, it feels really transitory, it doesn't feel substantive. So hype to hope is another one. Building checks, like that's a term in the industry I dislike. The old world was like, we're gonna build a nice check. And they come in here and they sit at this table and say, I built a really nice check at this company. I'm like, hey, can I say that like maybe you build people? Like, don't build a check, just build people up. So yeah, look at it from a different angle. So this whole thing taken in its aggregate is like, go from convincing to convicted, go from transactions to transformations, go from income to become, go from compensation to compassion, go from hype to hope, right? Go from building checks to building people. Here's another one. Stop worrying about being able to present. Like, that's the old world. It's like, I gotta present someone, I gotta show this to someone, I gotta show, okay, how about just be present? Like, stop being able to present, just be present. Like, watch people, be curious about them, be mindful of them. So this whole stack, this whole model is what I call next level marketing, because what I'm trying to say is, what if we approached it differently? I believe if we did, we would have a corporate soul. I believe if you go to the other side, the older world, none of those things are inherently bad. So let me be really clear. Like, is it bad to be convincing? No. Is it bad to make income? Mm-mm. Is it bad to have a transaction in a business? No. But I argue and I submit that if you make that the outflow of being focused on transformations, focused on compassion, focused on your own becoming, that those things will come. You'll have transactions, you'll be convincing, all of that stuff will happen. But I kind of feel like the industry over the years has given away that moral high ground, and all they run around is reduce me to a microeconomic agent. Like, that's what the world's trying to make me into. And I'm like, but that's not the real stuff. Like, the real stuff is the stories of people. It's the Lance, or it's this woman you helped with her feet. And I'm like, that's transformational, that's real. That's not hype. Like, you're a doctor, you're not coming at this trying to top spin this like some marketer. You're saying, I'm curious. Well, that's kind of cool, right? Well, what if it's real? Well, if it's real, we shouldn't try to be convincing. We should just be convicted. And I'll tell you, if you can't get your sister to do this, leave your sister alone. Like, don't bug people. Watch what happens. They'll be more curious. Like, just be real with people. So I like to think of these principles, and that was not aimed at UK, but no.
He says that from stage, so.
Yeah. My point being though, like, sometimes we tie ourselves in a knot trying to grow this business, and I'm trying to untie your knot. Stop it. Like, you got here naturally by some natural intersection of forces beyond your own control, and you can use that to help other people. Let that be what you soak in. Like, stay there. Okay? Now, if you want this to be a multi-million-dollar business, you're gonna need to get strategic. It is not an easy thing to create. Okay? There's a lot of factors that come into play of getting to really significant income. Can it be done? Yeah. Is it okay to have a vision for that? Sure. It's also okay to say, I want to hang with my cousins, I want to go on a couple fun trips a year, I want to make a few bucks to blow and have some fun with while helping another person. Okay. Figure out what you want it to be. But from my perspective, I get way less excited when I feel that gravitational pull towards the economic only, and it's taking me away from these principles of, become, transformation, compassion, people, being present, building others. Not the business of moving a product, but the business of moving people. I get excited at powering potential, which is our promise, right? We power potential. That is a dual promise. One is, this is called redox potential. So the actual product we measure is oxidative reductive potential. So we felt like, hey, if redox is measured in millivoltage as potential, how beautiful if my product powers potential at a cellular level, but my ethos and the spirit of my company powers human potential. That gets me excited. So there is a spirit here, and if you stick around us close long enough, I think you'll realize, like, everybody kind of looks at me funny, like, is this guy like for real? Is this real? That's okay, I would do the same to you. But we got a lot of years, and maybe this would help you to know, like, everyone runs around saying my dad turned down big pharma at the beginning. He did. We've turned down on huge multiples more than once, like way more that eclipses the other, on the basis that, like, yeah, but if we do that, this dies. Like, someone wants it. I get calls all the time, like, we're interested in your business, they want to talk to us. And I've had to talk to some because I have investors. So I have to be able to say, like, I entertain those things. But we've had stuff right at the 1 yard line. I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing that. And I'd be done. Like, my kids would be done. My grandkids would be done. Like, we're talking that kind of life-changing stuff. And I'm being very real when I tell you, like, it just didn't feel right. Like, I'm not solving for that. But when I see your faces and I hear your sweet stories and just the relationships and what it all represents, and I'm like, yeah, that's what this is about for me. I'd rather die with nothing in my bank account and keep that going. Who cares? We're not taking any of it with us, right? And there's a marginal return where it just stops giving you more. Like, there's a nice place where you can your kids can get a pizza when they want to get a pizza kind of thing. You know, it's like you get to that point in your life, and you're like, yeah, that's kind of nice. But then it's like the more money you make, it's like, no, the return diminishes over time. I know lots of really unhappy, wealthy people. So where's the happiness? Well, guess what? It's in convictions, transformations, the becoming in life, compassion for others, building people, not all that other stuff that's just really kind of a head fake. It's like, you gotta chase all this. So those are some of my deeply held beliefs, and that's something we're trying to promote here in what we refer to as our ethos, as our company's spirit. And we're not perfect at it. Like, you could catch me on any day and go, hey, you're blowing it. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. But that's part of it too, right? Which is compassion for self when you get a little confused. What else do you want me to cover for you guys? Go ahead. Anything else?
Well, did you have a question, Laura?
That's awesome. I always love when you speak, Tyler.
Oh, thanks. Being asleep.
He's absolutely right. There's no greater joy in this world to me than bringing joy to another human being. And
That's
when I
right.
sit here, I'm just so emotional hearing all your stories. And
That's awesome.
I'm so grateful. Yeah, it was my 11-year anniversary 2 days ago. So.
Can you speak a little bit on the foundation?
Yeah.
Because that's part of what you built.
Yeah. So 2015, my dad was retiring, and we wanted to do something that we thought would be a good reference point for what he had done. And we started the Asea Advancing Life Foundation with an aim to end cycles of poverty and abuse. That was our thesis, was cycles of poverty and abuse and suffering is the third dimension. So when we see suffering in the world of any kind, we don't really take a position on it other than it's suffering, and we tend to send support wherever we can. So if there's a natural disaster or a calamity of some sort, we tend to be a quick responder to that. Most recently, it's of course what's happening in both Israel and Gaza. And these are pretty highly charged attitudes on both sides. And it comes from deep-seated feelings of, it's not just ideological or theological, it's not just a belief structure, it's history. And it's displacement, and it's people feeling rights to things. And so we try to stay neutral to a certain extent and just provide support for kids that are hurting. And there's a lot going on that just every morning I wake up, and I'm a pretty prayerful person. I'm deeply religious, and I spend a lot of time in prayer just begging for peace, because this is, I don't care how you slice it, nobody wins in this. So we pay attention to what's going on in the world, and we try to administer a form of relief. It's small. In the grand scheme of things, it's small, but it's sincere. As it relates to poverty, you brought up, Sean, thank you for bringing the things we've done around the world we're kind of committed to education. So we purchased several acres in Ecuador in 2017, early 2017, and then devoted or essentially gifted it to an in-country group, and then built a trade school for the next 5 years. It took us a long time to build it. I went down in 2021 to do the final ribbon cutting. We would have liked to have done it in 2020, but for reasons everyone knows we couldn't. And it was so beautiful. I met with one of the ministers of education for the country in Ecuador, and I did some mission service in Guatemala when I was a young man, so I speak Spanish, and we were down there talking with him, and he had not come up to the highlands, to the cloud forest, to see our facility. He sent up teachers from his school, and they came back and said, you need to go up and see this place. So he drove up all the way up there. He's one of the sub-ministers of education, and immediately declared that it was a facility worthy of increased education beyond what we were doing. So they're offering not just certificates, but you can actually do a degree there now. The reason Sean's emotional is because you've never seen anybody work harder than Sean Burke. When I say he was covered head to toe in cement, dust, and we were wheelbarrowing, hundreds of barrels of hand mixed or with a small machine mixed cement. We've done a lot of work down there. We just finished schools in Ghana, and I like that we don't sell products in these places. That kind of makes me feel even better about it. So a lot of the work we do around the world is not in a place where we sell our stuff. And to me, there's something pure about that. It makes me feel better about it. It's not true of all of our initiatives, but I would say probably 80% of the stuff we do around the world is in places where we're not really trying to somehow lift the market sales of that market by doing it. It's just stuff we feel good about. So we're doing wells in Cambodia. We're doing a lot of work with sex trafficking and fighting that. Smaller things, but significant things. Training dogs that know how to smell for technological devices that have child pornography on them. And it's amazing that a dog can go into a home and smell the chemicals on that device and is trained to find them. And we've put several people in jail that we didn't have evidence for, but that were hiding devices that were holding the data of those images in places in their home that weren't easily found. And so things like that, where just good work is being done.
Isn't one of those dogs named Alf?
Alf, yep.
Advancing Life Foundation?
Yep. That's right.
I love the dogs.
Yeah, I'll close with this unless there's any questions. You know, if you're here, it's probably not just for you. You're gonna help and lift somebody else. And if you can keep that in your heart and mind, you're gonna be tempted to do like, I think of it as the microeconomic like rationalization, like why am I doing this? You're doing this for somebody else. If you can keep that in your heart and mind, it will start to grow into something for you that will pay you in way more than just money. You'll start to build relationships, you'll start to have experiences. There may come a time, there may not, there may come a time when the economics are really significant. But I know a lot of people that do it and have done it for years where it's not huge money, but they love the culture, they love the ethos, they love what they're doing, they love helping people. I have a personal belief that this is bigger than me, this is bigger than any of us. I do worry a little bit, if I'm being honest, that there are industries that don't want things like this in the marketplace. And so I'm pretty mindful of that. But you know, if you think about your sphere of influence, you think about the people you know and love, and you can do a lot of good. You can do a lot of good for a lot of people. Any questions for me though?
What are your top 3 book recommendations that everybody should read?
I'm more of a humanist, I think, than I am a businessman. So my first one is called The Anatomy of Peace. I don't know if you've read that, but that's probably my favorite book. But mostly because even what's happening in Israel right now would be addressed if we just lived to those principles. So it's kind of resolving conflict and how we see other people as people and not as objects. My favorite leadership book is called The Leadership Challenge, and it's a really old one. But it's been printed, or what do they call it? New versions and editions. That's a good one. I also like a book called The Experience Economy. That one talks about the fact that we're no longer in a market or service economy. We're in an experience economy where people will be interested in paying more, and more relevance would be found if there was an experience. And it culminates with the idea that we're moving to a guiding transformation economy where people want to be transformed, and that people are looking for transformation. They're looking for things that help them to feel that they're transforming. That's a great book. That's also old. I mean, that's early 2000s, but it's been updated several times, and there's some nuggets in there about where I think we are and where I think the general world is going. Those are a few diverse books. And then Les Mis is probably my favorite book.
The Unabridged.
Yeah, I read the Unabridged Les Mis probably once every 2 years just to read from the
It's a big,
Les Mis and Robin. Les Mis and Robin. it's hard to get through when there's 90 pages on
I
the
read
sewer
it
system in
one
Paris. You're just
time.
like, yeah, I don't need all
Picked up
that.
one
Yeah.
of your office?
Yeah.
Yeah, it goes, yeah.
That's probably my favorite literary work, but
And they wanted to say that they leave it to.
challenge.
Is it possible, since nobody will, well, a few people here were convention, but to get the recording of your opening we, Power of We, I know that, I think that ran out.
Yeah,
I saw it on YouTube recently, somebody posted it.
yeah.
Goodness.
That was kind of a cool story. So I worked with William Joseph, who came to our convention the year prior. William's a David Foster musician. He's fantastic, and was founded when he was 18 by David Foster, and then toured the world with David and Josh Groban and a bunch of great artists. And he's a really good friend. And he would come to my house and we would write and play together. And then this gentleman, Fraser from Canada or New York, he's originally Canadian. We were crossing our fingers we would get him to sing that song for us because he's so good, and he did. And he was so interested in what we were doing. We started sharing some of the things I've shared here today. And he's like, "Yeah, I think I want to help you write this." So we probably did like 6 hours of writing sessions on Zoom together. We were arguing over like every word. But to have him be willing to fly out there and sing that day, and we only had a demo recording of it because we didn't have, and we were doing it live, and we didn't have time to go into the studio to record it. But we all made a commitment that we would. But the demo is pretty good. It's actually a good rendition of it. So
It should be in our virtual office.
yeah, I just have to be careful because the copyright's not all mine now. Because I wrote all the lyrics with him, melody and a lot of the music. Although I've written music my whole life on the melodic side too. I mean, to have William Joseph writing the music and the string arrangement was just amazing. But I'm a huge believer that music can cross a lot of kind of cultural boundaries, and so it's been fun to share that.
Just your whole opening speech was so powerfully, just
Yeah.
everybody needs to hear that.
Yeah, I worry about the fact that I was fascinated with murmuration of starlings and the movement of those birds, and I researched a bunch on it, and it's interesting, I mentioned this, they pay attention to 7 other birds. You know, they're not paying attention to 1,200 birds at a time, they're moving, but those movements are so beautiful that they kind of come across as almost dance, right? But all human systems, all insects, all animal systems have these really beautiful, super relevant metaphors of how they work together. And the relegation or the diminishment of self in service of something bigger. I think we would all do well to think on that a little bit. So it was fun to kind of come up with a different thought process, kind of that moral creativity. Like, how do I help people realize that if you're solving for X and X is you, you're probably not going to be as happy. You might think you are, but when you realize that every living sustainable, you know, this notion of an ecosystem versus an ecosystem is beautiful. And there's a lot that's been written on that. That the very prevailing problems in the world today are manifest problems from ecosystems, where a world becomes so centered on self that they're enthroning the self and justifying pretty much any means or method at the aim of self. And yet the collective problems we experience, no single individual would ever choose for themselves. So there's this irony in it, right? By focusing on self and everyone's solving for X where X equals me, we're actually creating a whole huge, massive ecosystem of problems that none of those selves would ever choose. But they've chosen it in these very subtle ways by just being entirely focused on self. So ecosystems, which we obviously have animals and others that show how these work, have these beautiful interlacing movements of allowing the greater good. Ecos comes from the Greek oikos, which means the whole house. So there's this beautiful stepping back and saying, I'm not solving for me, I'm solving for the whole house. And there's a lot of really brilliant change management thought leaders that are, whether it's climate or political divisiveness or even the conflicts you're seeing now all over the world, they really are built off very subtle ecosystems as opposed to these beautiful open ecosystems. So that notion of the power of we is really not meant to be anything other than a reminder to all of us that there's some real deception going on, and I worry about it through the lens of my kids. I have 6 kids, and I watch how they're interacting with the world, and I'm trying to reprogram them a little bit and say, listen, slow down here, because these are really deceptive practices, and they're not really aimed at what prevails and sustains over time. And I think the greatest philosophies of the world and the greatest religious traditions of the world, faith traditions of the world, are inviting all of us to diminish self and to elevate awareness and sensitivity to others, which is an ecosystem, right? It's teaching you that I have a responsibility to ask the question of what I'm doing and how it's affecting others. What a world would be if we all kind of walked around with a little bit more of that bias.